Okay, right, 2 minutes past. Let's get going, and hopefully George will turn up at some point. So afternoon, everyone, on what for me is a fairly mild and misty afternoon in Liverpool, and welcome to this webinar. So my name's Nathan Harpham, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm a principal consultant at Agilysys, and I take a leading role in this webinar series and also in the Joining the Dots conference that hopefully many of you have already signed up to. 4th of March, if you haven't booked a ticket, get on it. So this is the second webinar in a 3-part series that we're doing in January. And that series covers target setting and safety performance indicators in road safety. Thank you, Steve, for the link. So, last week, I'm sure many of you attended our webinar last week, we explored the international perspective on target setting. So Dan Cancel was joined by Jenny Carson and Jessica Trong, and they looked at internationally who has targets, how should we set targets according to safe system principles, and how are we doing with target setting. So today we're zooming into the Great British context and thinking about target setting in Great Britain. Now, we have to zoom in a little bit further than GB as a whole, because of course we don't have a road safety strategy and associated targets at the moment. But fortunately, we don't have to zoom in too much further because we've got government bodies, agencies, and local authorities that all have road safety strategies and targets. So we're joined today by Transport Scotland, Transport for Greater Manchester, and Transport for London. So that's George Henry from Transport Scotland, Rhiannon Leeds from Transport for Greater Manchester, and Stephen Manson from Transport for London, who are all going to talk a little bit about their road safety targets and their road safety strategy and how they're doing with that. So we're going to have 10 minutes from each of those guys, and then we will finish at the end with some Q&A. So please do be putting comments and questions in the chat throughout this webinar, or using the Q&A function, and I will do my very best at the end to bring all of that together as we ask our speakers those questions. So I hope this will be useful today, and potentially some conversation starters as we look to share ideas and best practice. We've had lots of good progress with road safety strategy in the last 5 years or so, and also with safety performance indicators. And ultimately thinking about adoption of Vision Zero towards 2040 and 2050. And of course, we also sit within the global context of the UN's second decade of action for road safety from 2021 to 2030. Before we jump in, so we did a survey on road safety targets and strategy to feed into this webinar, and we also did a review of different local strategies as well, to try and get a current picture within Great Britain and who has those targets, what do they look like. We didn't get loads of responses to that, so I'm not going to do a deep dive into all that data because I'm a mathematician and statistically significant samples are important to me. So we're not going to talk through loads of graphs and charts and whatnot, and I want to leave a bit more time at the end for questions for our presenters and some good discussion there. But we did have some common themes in that I think we can build on today. So in terms of significant years that are coming out in strategies, 2030, 2040 and 2050 are our big years, the 2030 being typically for interim targets for 50% reduction in fatalities, 2040 and 2050 very frequent as our Vision Zero aims, so 0 fatalities and or serious injuries. But they're not the only ones that appear. So for example, West Sussex used 2036 for one of their targets. Fatalities and serious injuries were the key focus areas that came out, but there are some others as well. So Transport for London focused on monitoring the number of e-scooter and e-bike collisions as well. Other safety targets are used, but not as common, and these vary quite a lot. Although one that I wasn't aware of, the Southwest are monitoring the percentage of vehicles manufactured in the last 5 years to try and understand how new that fleet is as a key indicator. And safety performance indicators that we will be touching on a lot more in the webinar next week that will be hosted by Richard Owen are used by some local authorities, but monitoring and tracking progress towards those is a little bit less common. So that's kind of a general context, and now we can zoom into a few key examples. So George, I understand you're with us now. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Yeah, sorry, I was dealing with a kind of urgent press inquiry, which is why I was a couple of minutes late.
No problem, George. Good stuff. So George has worked in central government in Scotland for over 20 years, taking on various roles within the Roads Directorate, and is currently head of road policy and safety at Transport Scotland. So, George, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just quickly share my slides. Um, is that sharing my
I've
slides now?
it's not in presenter view; it's in the editor view at the moment.
Yeah, sorry, right. It's going, it should go now, 2 secs.
Got that, George? Over
Right,
to you.
yeah, so thanks for having me. As I've been kindly introduced, I'm George Henry. I'm head of road policy and safety at the Scottish Government. Um, want to speak to you today about our road safety targets and our road safety framework. Um, for those that maybe don't know, I'll kind of set the scene for where we are with our road safety framework. So like most countries now who have a road safety strategy or even individual authorities or partnerships, it very much embeds a safe system as it's deemed as international best practice. Our road safety framework was developed alongside our key stakeholders in our road safety community in Scotland. When developing the road safety framework, we looked at various countries across the world and what was happening. And we wanted Scotland, whilst we've always had a bit of a rich history in terms of road safety performance, strategies and targets, we wanted this one to have a kind of world leading vision. And that's We agreed on Scotland to have the best road safety performance in the world. Um, so the framework itself was published in early 2021, and that vision is supported by a long-term goal of Vision Zero, where nobody's killed or seriously injured on our roads by 2050. The framework has five strategic outcomes that are based around the components of the safe system. Um, and ultimately, I think that in Scotland, we've probably been, like many areas, maybe a little bit of a victim of our own success, and that with road casualties continuing to drop, over the last decade or so, that it's probably road safety, and maybe has always been slipped behind the likes of health, social care, education, etc., in the terms of, commitments. Of the way that it's viewed in our ranking system. So we really wanted to kind of raise the profile of road safety, partly because we were aware of the plateauing of the casualty reduction that we've been having in like similar countries right across Europe. But we felt the best way to do that was aligning with the government's national outcomes and indicators. So Scottish Government have climate change targets, very much investing a lot in terms of active and sustainable travel. We've published a new transport strategy. We're in the second version of our strategic transport projects review, where it identifies where all where all transport initiatives are laid out over the next decade. But even when you look at our health, justice, and education strategies, our national planning framework, and our place principles, road safety plays a fundamental part in every single one of those. And whilst probably historically it's always been about what road safety could do for other areas, we very much flipped it on its head in terms of this is that it's, well, what are these other areas doing for road safety as well? Um, so in the alignment across the policy areas, um, you'll see that there's, from the 12 strategic actions, in the time we've got, I can't spend too much time on them, but there has very much been a focus on health, education, climate change, active and sustainable travel through the strategic actions that we have here. These strategic actions are delivered through individual initiatives within annual delivery plans that are multi-agency initiatives. So right across the board with our partners, we work to pull forward initiative and evidence-led actions that are aligned to the kind of strategic actions of the framework and are aimed at reducing casualties to assist in meeting our targets. Our targets are very much similar to the UN in terms of what was out there, and then what the EU were looking at as well. That the whilst we have that compelling long-term goal of Vision Zero, the journey to achieving that is backed up by ambitious interim targets where the number of people being killed or seriously injured on our roads will be halved by 2030, and also a 60% reduction in children being killed or seriously injured as well. And for the first time in Scotland, and I think that, at the time of publishing, we're probably the first country in the world to do a full suite of modern user-specific targets that are based around key priority groups, such as pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, overrepresented age groups, young and old, as well as assessing casualty rates in most deprived areas, because we know that in Scotland you're 3 times more likely to be involved in a collision if you live in an area of deprivation. So they are really there and have been created to focus the attention on our partners and the way that we deliver. And ultimately, I suppose if we meet our intermediate outcome targets, then the overall targets start to look after themselves. But these are actually backed up by a number of intermediate measures that looks at casualty rates for cyclists, pedestrians, driving for work. And we've got a number of key performance indicators as well around seatbelt use, mobile phone use, etc. as well. And those are all monitored through our governance groups of our road safety framework. Now, there are 3 tiers of governance: the Strategic Partnership Board, the Operational Partnership Group, and Local Partnership Forum. The Strategic Partnership Board is chaired by our Cabinet Secretary for Transport. So leadership and coordination comes through at the highest levels: Chief Constables, Head of the Emergency Services, Head of Local Authorities, etc. all sit there. We have all those partners on the operational partnership group as well, but more at officer level and operational level. And we have motoring groups, active travel groups, wider safety groups, haulage association, etc. And when I joined, I had asked around local partnership. I'd asked about what was happening in road safety at that local level, and ultimately that was something that seemed to be lacking. So I see it very much as my role is that nothing should happen in road safety in Scotland without me knowing about it, and that's why I introduced local partnership forums to improve that communication between the national and local level. We also have a number of key priority groups that kind of encapsulate the modern user-specific targets, really, but those are the kind of 4 blue segments around the tyre that you can see in the graphic on the right. Now, all governance groups are there to monitor progress towards the targets. We also work alongside existing road safety groups more at local level, community partnerships, etc., sharing best practice, disseminating that information across Scotland. And we're also setting up a data group that will seek to collate and disseminate data across all partners, and more importantly, be used for future road safety initiatives. Now, how are they being tracked? All targets are tracked and monitored through the governance groups. We do that by gathering all the casualty data for each of the targets, the modern user-specific targets, as well as the intermediate measures and key performance indicators. All that data is gathered by our statisticians, easy for me to say, presented to members on the governance groups. It's also published through reported road casualties as well as through our annual report. And progress on our delivery plan for those road safety initiatives are also published within the annual report as well. So a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour in terms of what is happening in Scotland and what we're looking at. It would probably be wrong of me not to mention where we are at this present moment in time with progress. Now, we're probably doing okay with some of the more than user specific targets, but unfortunately fatalities in Scotland have kind of been rising. And I think that in 2024 there's another kind of small rise expected to be reported. However, that has been backed up by a lot of funding, record levels of funding going in, Cabinet Secretary putting a lot of support into road safety, as well as, you know, wider government. And there's a lot of kind of different initiatives that we're going to be delivering over the coming months and years that we expect that trend to start dropping. But that's it for me just now, Nathan, and happy to take any questions, or if you want to have them at the end, then that's fine.
Great stuff. Thank you, George. Yeah, I think we'll kind of whiz through all the presentations and then we'll have some questions at the end.
No worries.
Great. Right. Thanks very much. Let's move on then. So Rhiannon Lee has also worked in road safety for over 20 years and is currently Road Danger Reduction Manager for Safer Roads for Greater Manchester, and has spent the last 12 months very much leading the launch of Vision Zero alongside different partners. So Rhiannon, the floor is yours.
Afternoon. Thank you. I also have a set of slides. Teams will play. There we go. Starting off with a caveat, I'm not an analyst. I don't normally do data, so I have had help pulling this presentation together, which means at the end when we get to questions, if I don't have the answer, I will find it for you, but probably from another person. So thank you for having me this afternoon. As mentioned, I'm currently leading on Vision Zero for Greater Manchester. So we are a multi-agency partnership, and our bit of the partnership happens to sit within Transport for Greater Manchester, but the 17 partners altogether. So Vision Zero for us was only formally adopted in November last year, so it's still really early days. We've got a lot of work to do. We spent roughly 12 months doing some public engagement. We managed to highlight through that Greater Manchester's roads should be a place where people are safe, but also where they feel safe. And we found that when we did some public engagement, that wasn't always aligned. 1 in 2 people told us that they'd been directly affected by road traffic collisions in the last 10 years. They were quite happy with 20-mile-an-hour roads, but in appropriate places, not a blanket approach like other places have taken. Frustrated members of the public by intermittent active travel infrastructure. So it wasn't that they didn't want to use active travel, it was the start-stop elements that we were told about. But the biggest concern overall was highway maintenance. So knowing what the data tells us in terms of the road safety factors for causes of collisions, coupled with what the public have told us, we worked and pulled together this action plan. Our overall ambition for Greater Manchester is to have 0 fatalities and life-changing injuries by 2040, whilst increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. That sentence still hasn't sunk in, but I'm sure it'll stick the more I say it. When we launched our strategy and action plan, we were able to launch the Vision Zero Innovation Fund, which is where we've opened up £1 million for our immediate partners to bid into, so that especially local authority partners can start doing some activities that will directly contribute to that Vision Zero ambition. The action plan document details 32 actions over the next 3 years, which fall within the 5 safe systems components. They should be completed or at least well underway within the next 3 years. Some of them are partnership-led and funded, but others are partner-led and funded. So we've found already that collaboration is absolutely key for us. So in terms of the measuring then, we have 3 main areas that we'll be sort of monitoring and tracking. The overall bottom line for everything that we do is the casualty data, and that's the element that I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail today. We'll monitor progress on those 32 actions, and then still in development, we're looking at the safety performance indicator side of things. Wordy slide, sorry. So the 32 actions that we will track include some huge projects such as IRAP, some slightly smaller ones. So further down that list, it says refresh of our safety camera criteria. That's a project that's already underway. Some that are politically challenging, tackling illegal and inconsiderate parking. But all hand in hand, these will go with each other just to make our roads a safer place. We, as a partnership, we lead on targeted campaigns and initiatives, and then wider than that, we work with our blue light services to be able to deliver training where we can and support that training for them. The safety performance indicators that I mentioned will help us track that feel safe element. So this will ask the public questions such as, you know, how safe do you feel when cycling? How confident are you using public transport? How often do you walk rather than drive? And hopefully encourage lower speeds, safer environments, which will increase that active travel element as well. Okay. Greater Manchester Police are a crash force. I was so pleased last week that Matt Tranter went into a lot of detail about crash and how different injuries are recorded. So it saves me doing that again, because I won't do it justice based on what Matt covered. We know that with recategorisation of injuries historically, some have now moved between that serious and slight categorisation. This is why the collaboration has been really important for us. So we worked with Agilisis, with our police force and with partners to look at how are we going to measure Vision Zero. To my knowledge, we are the only area who is looking at fatal and life-changing injuries rather than full killed and seriously injured. So what we mean by that is, based on this list from the Department for Transport, we're looking at the very serious and moderately serious elements, those really higher end injuries. Those that are less serious and slight, people should fully recover from those. So by looking at the higher end stuff, we know that the reporting is more reliable. With self-reporting, some of the less severe injuries aren't necessarily as clear as they could be. We know that the level of investigation from the police on the higher end side of things is dealt with in a more robust manner, often with dedicated investigation teams within Greater Manchester Police. And we know that within the safe system, prevention is better, but we recognise that a reduction, it might result in a reduction of injury severity rather than the crash not happening at all. You know, one of the main thoughts around safe system is that crashes will still happen, but by making each of those components safer. So it's been really challenging to get to this point in terms of deciding what we were going to measure. Deciding what we were going to measure. And in fact, our internal data systems are struggling with the level of detail that comes from the crash data. Our first baseline year for measuring Vision Zero for Greater Manchester is 2022. There's a lot of information going on this graph, so I'll just try and talk you through it. The orange is our historical data. So this is still the full killed and seriously injured casualties that comes from the Department for Transport reported road casualties report each September. Where it changes to the teal green colour, that's where Vision Zero starts. So at a glance, it looks like we've halved things straight away. Clearly we haven't. It's because we have changed the parameters of reporting. We needed to make sure that was really clear to the general public, to politicians, to colleagues outside of the road safety arena of exactly how and why we've done that. We have decided that we keep banding around words, targets and ambitions and forecasts. The original Department for Transport forecast is based on adjusted KSIs. Because we've started Vision Zero with crash, that starts at 2022, so there shouldn't be any need for adjustment. And then we have our longer term ambition at 2040 to reach zero. So our interim target, if you like, is for 2030, and that's based on that 2022 baseline. We are at the very beginning of Vision Zero. It is brand new to Greater Manchester. I'm sure there'll be challenges. And in fact, one of the things that we found just over the last couple of months is all this talk of Vision Zero has actually brought road safety back to the forefront of people's minds. I got, in a good way, but I got told last week, it's all your fault. One of our local authority colleagues, it's all your fault. Everybody wants to know me now. Everybody wants to talk about road safety. I've never been so busy. So it just shows that actually now that we've got this message to reach the public, it's sort of having that onward effect that people are interested and they're showing that interest. But we've got to measure it and be able to report on it properly to track that progress. And like George mentioned, if we need to invest more and work stronger with colleagues, then that's what we're going to need to do. And because I'm a pretend academic, I've included references. Look, that's all from me. It's a very whistle-stop tour of Greater Manchester.
Great stuff, Rhiannon. Thanks very much, and on time as well, even better. There's a few things that are coming up in the chat quite specific to your 32 projects, how they're funded, and whether your action plan's available. I think Karen has been covering.
Oh, she's good. Yes. So there's a few in the team. I've booked a meeting room deliberately. There's a few in the team that will be able to answer the questions. That's perfect.
Right. Okay. Yeah. If there's anything else you want to add to that, then maybe use the chat while Stephen's talking in a minute. Cool. Okay. Thanks very much. We'll come back to you at the end. I've already got a few questions. So yeah, please do keep comments and questions coming for the end. Right. Stephen, over to you. So Stephen's a principal data analyst at Transport for London within the Safety, Health and Environment Directorate, and I think you've been at Transport for London for 11 years now, and supporting with yearly production of targets and analysis of that. So over to you, Stephen.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I will. Where's it gone? Sorry, just bear with me. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, all good. Over to you.
Okay. So in London, every time we have a new mayor, we create a new mayor's transport strategy, which is our strategic roadmap setting out our aims and ambitions for the next 25 years. So in 2016, when Sadiq Khan was elected mayor, we produced a new mayor's transport strategy, which was published in early 2018, and which included our Vision Zero ambition to eliminate all deaths and serious injuries on London's roads by 2041. Now, at the time, the data was looking very promising. We had made significant progress from 2005 in improving safety on London's roads. And if you were to put a trend line on that, you'd see that if we were to continue at that rate, we would reach Vision Zero by 2039, so 2 years ahead of schedule. We then added in a couple of interim targets, acknowledging that sort of progress was likely to get harder as we got closer to the overall 2041 target. So we had the targets in 2022 and 2030. And then if you were to join up the dots, as it were, we have all our annual targets for every year up to 2041. So job done, right? Well, not quite. Suddenly, the numbers plateaued. The pandemic gave us sort of false hope that we might still be making good progress. But coming out of the pandemic, we returned back to 2016 levels of deaths and serious injuries. And we missed our 2022 milestone by some distance. So looking at a sort of post 2016 trend line, you can see that we're quite far off the trajectory we need to achieve Vision Zero by 2041. Now, there's a number of possible reasons for this. The previous mayor had agreed to phase out all our government funding, so suddenly we had a lot less money to invest in road safety initiatives. The police also had their funding slashed, and resulting in less police out and about on the roads and less enforcement of bad behaviour on the roads. We'd already tackled most of the low-hanging fruit as such. things like for the most dangerous roads and junctions, limiting our ability to make further significant improvements, especially with very little money that we now had. In addition, we're facing sort of headwinds with a rising population, the introduction of new modes of transport such as e-scooters and now e-bikes, as well as seeing a growth in the proportion of SUVs and electric vehicles, which tend to be safer for their occupants, but are often more harmful to anyone that they come into contact with. And finally, we've invested a lot of money and effort in promoting more active travel in London, which is undoubtedly the right thing to do, but it does mean that we have more people moving about that aren't protected by metal boxes. So how do we go about setting targets in the post-COVID world when we're so far off our strategic trajectory? So post-COVID, we've seen some improvement, but nowhere near the level required to hit the Vision Zero target. And initially, we started very optimistically, setting annual targets on a trajectory to still meet the 2030 milestone. But these proved to be extremely challenging and unrealistic, and we kept missing them. So last year, we sort of acknowledged that we weren't going to meet the 2030 milestone. And so we've tried to focus on hitting the overall 2041 ambition. But again, we missed this annual target. And we're essentially just kicking the can down the road, as it were, setting more and more ambitious targets each year, which we're never actually going to meet. So this year, my proposal, which is yet to be signed off, is to sort of acknowledge the recent trend in the small annual improvements that we've been making, and to set a target for this year that is still very challenging, but is much more achievable, with the hope that technological advancements in the next decade or so will create that big shift that will help us to still achieve our Vision Zero ambition by 2041. And obviously, basically, we're looking at automation and the level of safety that would come with that. That's my presentation, a slightly different one, but I hope that's interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much, Stephen. Right, if I can invite George and Rhiannon back. Fabulous. Okay. Right, George, I'm conscious that you need to leave fairly promptly, so I'll probably fire some questions towards you first, if that's okay.
No worries at all.
So we've got a question in the chat from Lawrence. So Lawrence says, have you had to negotiate conflicting priorities between trunk road network and local network partnerships? If so, how does the forum go about this?
So effectively, the way that we're set up, we sit within the same roads directorate as our trunk road team. So the trunk road had their own strategic road safety plan, which I actually wrote back in 2016, and they've never renewed that. So they're very much aligned to our road safety framework. And because we split the funding between local authority through the Road Safety Improvement Fund, as well as Trunk Road having their own budget, there's not really any kind of competing priorities between the Trunk Road and local roads. We're very much combined in what the overall aim is. For example, our national strategy for 20 mile per hour, trunk roads are engaging with each local authority for which the trunk road goes through, and where it's relevant for 20, so they're kind of delivering on that as well. So it seems all one big happy family, shall we say.
Okay. And something from me, George, I noted you had the ambition, or you have the ambition for Scotland to have the best road safety performance in the world.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about kind of where that's come from and how that maybe shaped your action and monitoring moving forward?
So it's not went very great since then, because obviously since the framework, as kind of Stephen had mentioned, that you know, the pandemic, when we published the framework, then the pandemic hit. We've had that kind of post-pandemic hike in fatalities. I think that we were probably sitting around fourth or fifth best in the world at one point. And that's kind of slipped a bit with the behaviours that we've seen. But there's a lot of people. I've actually sat in conferences where people have probably not known that I've been sitting in the back of the room, and they've kind of laughed at us for having a ambitious vision for us to have the best road safety performance. We still want to achieve it, and we'll still absolutely do everything we can to achieve it. But it's more about being aspirational for us. It's more about setting that bar high and making sure that we're kind of all committed to try and make a difference, reduce casualties. Whether we catch up with the likes of Norway and is another thing, but there is certainly a great level of commitment, and I don't think that why should we not be aspirational in what we're trying to achieve? The fact that we've got people being killed or seriously injured on our roads in this day and age, and when you look at some of the causation factors that we have in Scotland, around 15-16% is still someone not wearing a seatbelt. Now, that's just ridiculous in this day and age. And even you want obviously technology to probably start coming up. We've got all the audible sounds and everything else, but why does a car even start if it's not fitted properly around your body? Surely manufacturers should be considering some of these things. So for me, that it's we've always been fairly ambitious in what we want to try and achieve. We know it's difficult and it's getting harder and harder to get that reduction now, but we're still committed to doing it, and we'll do everything we can to try and get there by 2030.
Great. Yeah, and you mentioned ambition there, and Rhiannon, you talked about Vision Zero and that idea of reaching the public and kind of bringing the public on board more. And maybe I can come to you next. How do we keep people on board and kind of motivated within this common goal to reach Vision Zero moving forward?
I think we're at a point where people are finally realizing it is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to go to work, to go to school, to come home from a night out and not make your journey. And I think we've looked at this communication with the public, and they agree. When it's happening to them and it's directly affecting them, they agree. And I think our job is to then communicate, well, why are we doing all these other actions? It's because hand in hand, they will directly affect everybody who travels.
Nice. George, Stephen, do you want to comment on that? How moving forward do we kind of keep people on board, maintain momentum?
I can come in first if you wish. I mean, I think that we have got a bit of I don't want to say sales pitch, but trying to get people to understand. Again, as Rhiannon said, that when it happens to them, or their families, you kind of realise the importance of kind of road safety or travelling. And I think that the bigger picture that we've tried to get with not only members of the public, but other areas of government and other areas of partners as well, is that your ferries don't run if you've not got roads. Your planes don't run because your people can't get to the airport. People can't get to their work. We've went through some, and we're going through it at the moment. That's where I'm going after this, is to one of the public exhibitions on our national speed limits. The proposal of reducing 60 to 50 in single carriageway roads. When you look at the percentages of people being killed or seriously injured on our roads of single carriageways, it's horrific. And again, we've had so many people coming into these exhibitions where this is a disgrace. It's going to take me half an hour longer to travel 3 miles down the road, and all that rubbish. But when you actually sit down and speak to these people, you turn them around so quickly. So I think that it's really important that we continue with the education through motorists and road users more widely. And I think that that's something that we've suffered in Scotland, which I believe probably had a bit of an increase in it because, coming out of the pandemic, everything else was getting said around other areas. We didn't do any of our behavioural change campaigns because of restrictions and government spending. We're back doing absolutely everything now, and we're hoping that has a change in mentality. But I believe that behaviour has changed because it's not been and hearing it on the radio, seeing it on the TV, going to the cinema, seeing the adverts. And I think that these are the things that we need to continue to do and try and sell it, and not sell it, but describe it in the best way that we possibly can for people to understand. I think that we get caught too much up in talking about targets and, everything else. Shouldn't really be about targets. That's what governments and stuff have, but it's about saving lives. And I think that we need to probably look at our vocabulary that we use and the way that we communicate to just continue to, put it down the throat of saving lives.
Yeah, I completely agree, George.
Yeah, very much agree with what George said, and it's about these numbers are very useful for us and authorities and stuff, but they don't mean much to the public. And if we can get those messages across in ways that are sort of impactful for them, saying that 2 people die on the roads every week or something, or whatever it is, in a much more real way, then that's where we're sort of heading. And also behavior change is going to be crucial to getting anywhere near Vision Zero, and there's only so much we can do from a physical sort of improve the road safety of the junctions and that sort of thing. It really needs a change in people's mindsets and how they think about driving.
And I guess building on behavior change, and thinking about what we can do and maybe where technology is going to come in the future. There's Phil's raised in the chat a point about AVs, and the real world evidence for AVs. And I think, Stephen, you said in this new plan you've got towards 2041, this kind of this curve rather than the straight line in terms of your numbers, you talked about the impact of technology moving forward and your kind of hopes there. How realistic do you think that is, and what role do you think technology can play in really driving that curve downwards when it needs to on your graph in kind of 5-10 years time?
Well, I think it can play a very big part, and I'm not saying that AVs is going to solve everything, and we are doing trials in London. There is evidence supporting that they do help improve safety on the roads, but even the simple things like George was saying about motor engines not starting if you haven't got your seatbelt in, alcohol locks, I think they did in Sweden, lots of different things that are sort of out of our control but are in the gift of automation, the manufacturers of cars and vehicles, that could improve safety on the roads. And it's, I think, about putting pressure on them to actually put these things in, is what's going to help drive safety going forward.
Rhiannon, George, have you thought about the role of technology and automation in terms of your Vision Zero roadmap for the next 20 or so years?
Not explicitly as an action on this action plan that we've got currently. We have alluded to improvements in vehicle technology. Sitting within Transport for Greater Manchester, we have the B network, so all of our buses are back in public ownership. So there's a little bit of I was going to say control, and that's not what I mean, influence that we can have over our immediate partners in terms of what vehicles are they purchasing, how does automation and assisted technology help in terms of the safety side. So a little bit, but not explicitly, no.
So I thought about it massively, to be honest, when we've got technology as one of our strategic actions. But I realised when developing our road safety framework that we're not going to see the big hits in technology saving us and reducing casualties in the lifetime of that framework up to 2030. I think that 30 to 40 and 40 to 50 will be absolutely massive in terms of technologies. But and it's obviously a reserve matter to the UK government, and I think that general safety regulations of vehicles, I hope, will be adopted so that we've got the same level of safety across vehicles as we have in Europe to the UK then. But I also think that manufacturers have got their part to play here, and I'm luckily enough I've got invited to a road safety roundtable with Mercedes at the start of February in Stuttgart, which I'm looking forward to going. I don't know if anybody else on the call is going to go, but this will be the first time, I think, in all my years of road safety that I'm getting to speak to a vehicle manufacturer direct. And it's all about data and the telematics that they gather and how it could be used for road safety initiatives. So I'm really looking forward to it. But the one thing for me is it's wrong that we sell vehicles on, oh, this vehicle's got a top speed of 140 miles per hour when it's double what the national speed limit on your highest speed limit road in the UK is, and it goes 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. Why is that important? And I think that I know it sells. You're not, well, not want to offend anybody driving a Ferrari or a Porsche or whatever, but you're not buying that type of vehicle to drive at 20 mile an hour around London, really, are you? You want to kind of open it up and feel what it's got. So I understand that joy of driving, and automation may take that away from some people, and some people don't like it. But ultimately, I think that when you look at human behaviour being an impact in high 90% of all your road collisions, then it needs to come. But I also don't think it should be switched off or be allowed to be switched off either.
Cool. So technology and automation potentially playing a more significant role, as you said, George, 2030s, 2040s. In the here and now, I mean, Stephen, you talked about TfL and missing targets in the last few years. George, you talked about 2023, 24 fatalities not being where you wanted them to be. So Stuart's asked in the chat, what accountability is there for missed annual targets amongst your organisations, and how do we ensure that missed targets drive renewed focus on future efforts? Anyone want to pick that challenging one up first?
Okay, so I think that there's personal and organisational accountability and what you do and how you're doing it, and then there's obviously government accountability. I mean, the one thing is whilst they're government's targets, they're everybody's targets. They're not just Scottish governments or Transport Scotland's, they're Police Scotland's, they're all local authorities, everybody's signed up to it. So I think that, collectively we need to be accountable. And that again comes from leadership and coordination from my perspective is how do we demonstrate that we are doing absolutely everything that we can? I think that there is a number of things that we are doing. Some of organisations because they've always done it. But again, I think that from our perspective, when talking about embedding a safe system and moving forward, is that there is a lot of times where we need to make sure that we are helping the people who are delivering for us. So our key partners, are we investing in them? Are we making sure that they're trained to the best of the knowledge and how they and how we get there? And do our absolute utmost to make sure that we're delivering in the right way. And how do we ensure that missed targets get that focus? Well, that really comes with effort and budgets and resources and everything else, and that's something that we're trying to get right. I think that we've got it right at the national level, and we're trying to kind of influence as much at a local authority level as well to show that people are supported. We've done that with a lot of in terms of procurements and helping with different bits and pieces. There's a lot of work to do, and I think we just need to keep tackling it head on and keep putting even the bad news stories out there. The rise in fatalities is not welcomed in Scotland at all, naturally. But use it to the best of your advantage to get more resources, get more money, get that renewed focus, and try and fix it.
Great, yeah. Rhiannon, Stephen, anything to add on that?
I'd agree. I think we're in a position where we can work with politicians to keep this at the forefront on a regional and a national scale. And as Georgia said, sort of use that to our benefit. We welcome a national strategy, so watch this space, and then hopefully we can align our, especially local authorities, but all of our partners, not only to meet our targets and ambitions, but also nationally. What we've done with our action plan is the 32 actions that we've set, we believe will influence that bottom line of the KSI data, and for us, the fatal and life-changing injuries. So the accountability is on the actions, and that's at an incredibly high sort of senior strategic level at that start. So the accountability is on the doing. What influence that has, we can only hope that it does, as George has mentioned, that it puts things in the right direction.
Great. And you just talked about that bottom line in terms of ultimately collisions and casualties. I guess before that, we've got our safety performance indicators that are maybe indicating what we're going to be seeing in collisions and casualties next year and so on. So Tony's asked in the chat, can we have confidence in our safety performance indicators when our main indicator, i.e. collisions, is subject to underreporting? Now, of course, we know with stats 19 that there is underreporting, particularly with those less severe injuries, slight injuries, although quantifying the extent of that has been difficult. So how do we have confidence in our kind of our lead indicators, our safety performance indicators?
I mean, the one thing around underreporting is that we have Association of British Insurers around our governance groups, and we are looking to try and sort of tackle probably the insurance industry a little bit head on, of going, well, you've got all this data that you gather on locations of where collisions are occurring and the risks are, and various different bits and pieces. So therefore, can you share that? Can we look at how we, break down those barriers that have been there previously because it's been a commercial issue or whatever, however they wish to bring it forward? That's fine. But I think that the way that we, all the data that's out there, and that's why this data working group that we're going to set up to gather all that data to share amongst partners, will allow us to be far more targeted and probably in our risk assessments around where those challenges are, and try and tackle them before they become problems. And that's exactly what we're trying to be, is a lot more proactive in our approach, and hope that then comes with the benefits.
Right, and of course, proactivity being a key part of the safe system. Anything Rhiannon or Stephen you want to add on confidence in safety performance indicators?
In terms of underreporting, we're working with the Department for Transport to try and get hold of hospital data, although it is proving extremely challenging. Just on the previous point, we're trying to lead by example in terms of road safety and making sure that all our buses have the latest technology. They can detect if a pedestrian or a cyclist is within a meter of the bus or potentially in conflict with the bus. We have like monitoring of pedal movements in the buses and doing all sorts to try and do whatever we can where we have a direct influence to drive those numbers down and lead by example, and that goes through to our contractors, and anyone who's working for TfL has to sign up to safety standards for all their vehicles and things like direct vision standard that we've implemented.
That's the one thing, just to come in on that, Nathan, is that we're trying to influence in Scotland a little bit. So many of these vehicles that are coming on our roads now, they're green and they're electric and everything else. But what about the safety kit that's in them and all of that as well? So if you can get your public procurement contracts and you can get all your people who are driving for work having the safest vehicles that they possibly can, that is such a large percentage of the vehicles that use our roads every day, and could then have a positive impact on other kind of road users. The other thing that I think that the journey cam stuff, whilst I know that many partnerships have had it down south, we've not. We're going to do a big push because Police Scotland are bringing it in through digital evidence sharing capability, and kind of try and do a push on that to try and influence that behaviour again of every vehicle in the network could be a police vehicle, because if there's a dash cam in it, you can be reported.
Right, okay. So we've got a few minutes left, conscious of wanting to respect people's time. So before you all go, if you had to kind of sum up a single key focus area for the next 5 years, in terms of moving towards your interim target for 2030, what might that be in terms of key people to influence, key kind of schemes you're looking to implement, the intervention piece, whatever it might be. Go for it.
And you go, Stephen.
Going back to what George said about people driving for work. So our sort of recent analysis has shown that 50% of all KSIs in London involve someone driving for work. So we're working very hard with the industry and gig economy companies and all those companies that use vans and cars for work and stuff to try and push safety onto them more and put the onus on them more.
George, you and the team at Scotland?
I don't know if I could wrap up in one thing. We've got so much that we want to do. The way that we manage speed, I think, has to be better. Whether that be through limits, whether it be through vehicle technology, with ISA, whether it be enforcement and the likes as well. But I think that if we can try and I think that there's a psyche there, isn't it? That's let's get to somewhere as quickly as we possibly can, and the way that we look at journey time, it's trying to win the hearts and minds of the public on that one, and kind of have the impact. But between that and rolling out full suite of road traffic diversionary courses, whether that be through drink, drug driving and different things like that as well, I think that we need to kind of start looking at all of that and get it implemented.
Yeah, great. And finally, last but not least, Rhiannon.
I was also going to say that a reduction in speed is key, so I've quickly thought of another one. For me, communication and that behaviour change. This is a generational shift. We need to completely change the mindsets of people that road safety is important, and for them to just care about each other. So whether it's through advertising, campaigns, education, enforcement, whatever it needs for that individual person, if the message can reach them and they act on it, that's what we need to do. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Stephen, Rhiannon, George. Thank you for joining me today with 1 minute to spare. Good stuff. So that concludes our webinar on target setting within GB. Join us next week for our webinar on safety performance indicators. I've noticed that we put a question about when is it and how do we register. So it should have come out via email. If not, we'll make sure that you get an email, Axel, to get onto that one next week. So Richard Owen will be joined by a number of panelists to discuss safety performance indicators, how we use those, and how we monitor safety performance indicators effectively. So do join us for that one next week. I believe it is 2 p.m. Wednesday, so same time as this one, easy to remember. All right, good stuff. Stay safe out there, and hopefully catch you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye now. Bye-bye.